welcome everybody to Filipinx and Product Management. I'm really excited for our panel this month. So thank you in advance, Ervin and John, for planning up until this, the few weeks coming in. So Ervin Ebalo, he's a group product manager at HealthSherpa. And we're also joined by John Haag, who is a lead product manager at Zynga. So virtual round of applause for our panelists today. Why don't we start with Ervin? Just talk to us a little bit about what product management looks like at your company, and just like a sentence, your sort of blurb. And for folks in the audience, feel free to start adding questions about PM.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. So as Abby mentioned, I'm a group PM at HealthSherpa. What a group PM is essentially a player coach. So I've got projects and areas of the product that I'm responsible for, but I'm also responsible for helping, like my direct reports which would be other product managers, helping them be successful in their areas. I'm blocking them, giving them assistance and whatnot. We're a health insurance marketplace. So think like Uber, Airbnb, that type of thing, right? You've got a supply side and a demand side trying to find some sort of transaction together. And so we've got PMs dedicated to each side of the marketplace, plus a core product. We also have a growth and sort of monetization team at HealthSherpa. I think we're about roughly 100 people in our org, and I think there's roughly about 5 or 6 product managers.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. John, what about you? So what does your role look like over at Zynga?
Yeah. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. So I'm a lead PM at Zynga. Zynga, in case you don't know, is a mobile games company. What I specifically do, or the team that I'm specifically on, is our central product management role. And our team, essentially, we're kind of like consultants to other game teams where we help empower them, but we also connect other central teams and functions to those game teams, such as central tech, central analytics, and we span a lot of company level projects that don't typically have PM support, and just provide a lot of that company context all around. I have worked in the game team position in the past, and at Zynga, how they currently work is essentially Zynga is pretty product led. A lot of the PMs, they're in charge of features that have millions of dollars on the line for the business, but also are in charge of listening to and building what our players really want in the game. So that's the game team PM scope at Zynga, and also the central PM scope that I'm part of.
Cool. Thank you both for that. So I think one of the interesting things about product management is, and I think a lot of roles in tech, is that there isn't really a linear way to get there. And that was one of the things that sort of I connected the dots when I met both of you separately, is that you sort of fell into product management from a different role. So I'd love to just hear both of your stories about how you came into it, especially because I think that's really unique for anyone who becomes a product manager, especially if you've been in the field for a few years. So I don't know if John, Ervin, if either of you wanted to take that one first, and then who wants to give it a go?
Yeah, yes, I can go. Growing up, I really liked building, but I didn't like coding. So I've always kind of kept it in my mind, like, I wonder if there's like a more of a business type career that lets me be close to building a product, but not needing me to require to pick up any sort of learning. I was first introduced to product management as a career when I was an undergrad in college. I had met someone who was at an MBA at the same university, who was actually interning as a PM at Zynga. So my journey has kind of gone full circle. But essentially what he told me he did, which was analyzing player data, both quantitative and qualitative, working with engineers, designers to build new features in games. And also me being a gamer, it felt like the perfect career. It seemed like it checked all the boxes that I wanted. And then I ended up going into finance and public accounting right after university. So I landed pretty far from where I thought I wanted to be and where I knew I ultimately wanted to end up. How I got there. So more and more, I was feeling like I wanted to leave public accounting. So I started off at Ernst and Young, did that for a couple of years. I wanted to leave public accounting and work at a company where I could explore a little bit more. So I went and I got a job at Electronic Arts. I was still in their finance department, but at Electronic Arts, I was able to reach out to a lot of PMs that were there. I bribed them with a lot of coffee and just said, "Hey, I'm looking to learn more about product management. Could you spend some time talking to me about it?" And that's how I started formulating more of a um, more of a designed and curated approach towards getting into product management. So I started analyzing where I was currently at, what the skill gaps were needed in order to get in. Ended up taking some time off after Electronic Arts to focus on filling in those skill gaps, such as learning SQL. I networked with a lot of other product managers in the space, went to gaming events because I wanted to end up in gaming. I also wrote a lot. I in games, a lot of the product management skill set is based around deconstructing your competitors. So analyzing the market, looking at what competitors are doing well, looking at what you would improve. So that's how I kind of built my product sense when I wasn't getting direct job experience. And then thankfully landed into an APM role. And the role was specifically designed to take promising, hungry candidates that have a different background and put them into a junior product management role and then grow them from there. And that was when I landed at my job at GM City. And ever since, I've been growing in my product management career. So that was my path.
Yeah, I hear a lot about, using transferable skills to switch into product management, and a lot of it really has that, critical thinking, like data analysis and things like that. So I've heard a lot about that through folks and how they transitioned. Ervin, how does that sort of resonate with how you fell into product management?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's I came from a technical background, but I think any person, regardless if you had a technical background or not, came in finance, came through marketing, or you can make a switch over to product management. Like Abby said, it's around critical thinking and making decisions and being able to work with ambiguity. That's a big one. But for me specifically, I had a technology background. I ended up getting a degree in computer science. Out of school, I worked for a small technology integrator that built high-end collaboration systems like conference room theaters, where like you press a button, the projector turns on, the shades open and close, and lights turn on, all that stuff, like really fancy stuff. Um, and so there's programs that I would write that made all of these pieces of hardware work in unison. So which was super cool as a person who dealt mainly with software, like seeing like actual living things, or not living things, but physical things do stuff. And what I what I enjoyed about that was that like the project cycles were very, very short. So like every month, there was a new customer, there were new problems, there was new use cases that I got to sort of like sink my teeth into and try to solve. And so I really love the discovery and feedback loop of these little mini projects. Um, Over time, though, it got like I think like most things, over time it got boring. But like I've always been good at putting together solutions with the tools that were available to me, whether it be like Dreamweaver, that's dating myself, but like like making your own website and other things. But it seemed for me at least like the next progression was to go build for other builders. I still, though, at this point, I didn't know what a product manager was. Anyway, I ended up going into working for an electronics manufacturer who built all of these like AV type of equipment. And there, I got to work alongside product managers and engineers, and um, like my first sort of tasks were testing the software, testing the product, and making sure that they worked. Then that my responsibilities evolved to writing test cases themselves, then evolved to writing requirements. Then that's when I got my first PM role as an associate PM, managing a small portion of a piece of product. Then I owned an entire product and I owned multiple products. And then from that, I started managing PMs directly. Kind of like I mentioned before, though, being in product management for a while now, and I did have a technical background, which helps me. I don't think you really need a technical background to get in. It's the ability to dive deep into a problem and understand cause and effect of things and be okay with decision making.
Thank you. I think that that's really interesting. It really could just pivot through any which way, as long as, again, you can find those transferable skills. We even have a few questions here in terms of like, what are some skills that you think every PM should have, and like, how can you break in through entry level? I guess these are just things to keep in mind as you sort of answer these questions through your storytelling. But I think one thing that we sort of came up when as we were planning this event is just why you chose to become a PM. I think both of you covered that in your story with the why, but if you want to elaborate on also why you're choosing to stay a PM, I think that would be really interesting, because it's not an easy job. And again, it looks different with every company. So I'd love to know just both your perspectives on the why.
Sure. I can take a stab at that one. Uh, I like I like getting involved in like with everything as opposed to just like quote unquote stay in my lane, right? Um, and so this idea, from getting being a part of something from like an idea all the way down to seeing it in the user's hands, and then sort of it sounds cliche, but like there is this joy that I get. So I'm like, oh, that did solve a problem. Let's keep going, right? I love connecting the dots, seeing patterns, right? Depending on how many users you may have, you can see, people will say one thing, but actually do something else, and being able to sort of dissect that and then solve that pain point through your product or removing something from the product to solve those things. Um, I like one of the reasons that I got away from development was once I learned how to solve a problem, I didn't want to write that code anymore. I was done. I just wanted to move on. And so, in a sense, as a PM, I'm looking for those problems, working with the cross-functional team to go figure out whatever that solution is, and then let that project execute. Then I'm off to go find something else um, to go work on. And I like to describe myself more of a problem finder rather than a problem solver. I mean, though I help to solve those problems as well. Um, and so I think that's why um, I choose to stay in product management, because of the exposure, and I get to learn about a lot of different things that than I would think I would get exposure with in a different role.
Totally. I think cross-functional collab really exposes you to the different elements of what the project could even look like. And that's an opportunity for you to see so many perspectives that wouldn't even have crossed your threshold if you weren't working with them. So I think product management is a really good space to be in. I don't know if John, you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I can add a few pieces.
Sure.
One of the reasons why I'm still in is I really like what I'm doing a lot more than what I used to do. So I didn't find accounting and finance as fun, but the primary reason for that was a couple of reasons. One was, at least at the level that I was at, there was a lot of recurring work, a lot of quarterly or annual workflows that I was just repeating over and over again. So I didn't feel like I was learning. And when I feel like I've kind of mastered a certain area or feel like I'm not growing as fast, I get bored pretty quickly. I think that's just something I understand about myself is I'm constantly seeking, I need to constantly seek out a steep learning curve to stay engaged. Um, but also like I wanted to be what I found in finance and accounting was I was constantly doing retrospective work. These are business decisions that have already been made. These are problems that have already been found and solved. Um, and it just didn't feel like I was contributing meaningfully to that. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to shift into product management. What's keeping me here is one, I get to play games for work, which as a gamer is amazing. I think I get comped for games like Call of Duty and Diablo because it's competitive analysis, and I don't know where else I could do that. But also like going back to what I mentioned about steep learning curve, like I'm constantly learning. Like right now in my position, I'm learning a lot more soft skills and how to be a manager and how to scale myself. There's a lot of projects that if I had to do them myself instead of leverage additional PM help, like grow our junior PM talent so that they can help me out so I can continue to step above. Like that's the steep learning curve that I'm trending right now. But also, as Ervin called out, a lot of that cross-functional exposure, I've learned a lot about design and UI UX and engineering that I didn't normally have. And then in my central role too, being able to step out of just the product that I'm looking at, seeing how our CPO thinks, having presented business models to our CEO, and getting that exposure in terms of thought and how they look at the market, how they look at opportunities and threats, and how they plan 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road. So yeah, product management for me is a place where I'm constantly learning. So I'm constantly engaged, and that's why I'm still in it.
Thank you for that. I think that's actually a really good segue into sort of how both of your roles evolved. So I think as even from starting from an APM role to now like lead roles and group product manager roles where you're sort of managing other product managers. How has your role sort of changed? And I think, we have this theme of the size of the company where I think products involvement in the different business decisions can change as well. So just from your perspective, just thinking about the evolution of your role from associate to lead, how has like the organization sort of shaped that for you? Ervin, let's start with you.
Sure. I think, depending on the size of the org, a lot of things can change. I mean, there's these are generalizations, and I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but like, the wearing multiple hats. In a small org, you might, it's probably required that you wear more, multiple hats more than just, your PM hat. Versus like a large org, it's like, hey, just understand what you need to go build or something like that. And sometimes at a large org, you're not even allowed to go and wear a specific hat or like, hey, this is this boundary between these two functions or these two boundaries, stay out of it in that sense. Um, the definition of fast can be a little different as well, from org to org. But how things have changed is really in terms of um, whatever that quote unquote project is, that you're dealing with starting as an associate and as you level up in your career. And big can mean, the amount of work in itself, like how long that'll take. It could be the complexity. It could be the risk, the business risk. It could be a small amount of work, but the risk is really, really high. It could also be just a lot more stakeholders to deal with. What level of stakeholders you're talking to as well? Is it just, is it your peers? Is it managers all the way up to the C-suite? But I think I mentioned it before, is as you level up, the more ambiguous your problems are, that you're dealing with. And so you have to be really comfortable in just not knowing and then finding yourself to go, or finding what it is to go pay attention to, and then what not to. And it's scary, regardless of what level you're in. There's a thing that I forget his name, but the CEO and founder of Coda, he broke it down or like simplified it into problem, solution, how, and execution, or PSHE. You know, early in your career, somebody's already given you the problem, the solution, and how to go do it. You just need to go execute it. And at some point, you know you're leveling up, and uh, problem and solution are defined. You just have to go figure out how. And then at some point, only the problem's defined. Then you go figure out the solution. And then at the ultimate level, in a sense, you know, out of all of the opportunities and problems that are out there, you get to go pick which one is the most important to invest in, which problem or opportunity is most important to invest in.
Nice. Yeah, I think that is really important because basically having more autonomy depending on the size. I think what you're calling out for what actually big means could mean a project in itself, and that really changes the way that work is done, and there's no real linear way to do that. So what resources are available to you, I think, is something to keep in mind as you sort of think about what your next role could be and where. So I think that those are really key things to think about, not even just related to product management, but it's sort of in any role. Like how do you fit into the spoke, or however that analogy is with the wheel. John, what about you?
Yeah, I think Ervin covered most of it. I can just offer some specifics based on what I've seen in my career. So I've started off, at least when I was in my PM. As a PM, I've only worked at two companies. One was small to medium-ish, and then now we're large-ish, medium to large-ish. What I tend to find is that in smaller companies, as Ervin mentioned, I think you have a tendency to wear multiple hats. I also think, at least from my experience, like titles level differently. I think you can, what I've seen at least is like people with more inflated titles, like director, can get leveled to maybe like a leader or principal if you go to a larger company. And that's just the nature of the size. For example, like at my first job, Jam City, going from senior PM to director was fairly quick. As long as you could, at senior PM, you already had direct reports and you were leading a product. Whereas at Zynga, if you're a senior PM, you're still firmly within the IC role. Um, but in both cases, I think what does uh, carry over is exactly what Ervin mentioned. It's like how much of that structure or that framework is given to you, whether it's like problem, solution, and how to execute, and you just go do it, and then or just the problem, and then you need to figure out how, or figure out the solution to it, and then figure out how. So that all is roughly the same. I think it's just the timeline and the scope that has changed for me depending on the size of the company.
Got it. Thank you. We have a question here. I think that is related just to size, or just how you would do work at different size companies. Does the size of the company sort of like impact the different tools you use, or even frameworks or approaches to a problem? Is that even a question that you can answer? Does it depend?
I think, yeah, out of necessity of communication. Um, Scale and communication is going to be the hardest thing, you know, from small to a large company. You could literally create a roadmap, tell write down your specs and tickets for engineering and Notepad, and be good with it. But it probably only works up to like 1 to 3 people, right? Then you want to probably get a more robust system to be able to communicate at scale. So I think the reason for the tool change is how do you communicate information effectively at scale?
What are some tools that either of you are using to sort of mitigate that communication? Is it through meetings, or is there an actual tool that you use that everybody looks at?
Um, at one point, you know, we would, there was a point where we would write meeting notes and docs and product information in Google Docs. works well. Like it's all there, but it was hard to search. And then as you onboard people, you're now dealing with like creating a like a folder structure within Google Drive, etc. Right? But if you're in the Atlassian world, you have Confluence where you can create spaces and directories and all of those things. So you can a lot easier to self-serve. That's where, at least in the company I work for today, we had both, and we're still migrating some information from one to the other. We're primarily Slack in terms of chat communication, Google Meets in terms of video calls. Yeah, did that answer your question?
I think so. Different tools and then just how it evolves. Sometimes it's depending on the size. I think other times it's just what are you coming into? There's, if you're an established company, there's already a system set there. Do you have to start
Yeah.
fresh or do you just work with what you have? I think it really depends. So thank you. I kind of want to pivot gears into more of just like the identity side of just like being Filipinx working in tech. I'll also have this slide open for the folks generally. After this, we'll sort of do an audience Q&A. I know some folks answered them before, but feel free to drop them in here. I'll sort of shuffle it. But anyway, back to the original theme here. So we're part of Filipinx in Tech, and we're looking to sort of build community based on this shared identity. So I wanted to ask you both in terms of how that has been both an asset and a challenge for your careers working as product managers here. So how has the Filipinx identity been an asset and a challenge for you? John, let's start with you.
Okay. Yeah. I'll start with the challenge first. I think when I was getting into product management, I got a lot of early not necessarily mentors, but early managers and advice, and kind of this perception too that PMs were very type A, very outspoken, very like strong-willed in their decision making. And I do think that actually aligned with Zynga's earlier product culture as well. Really, it's just if you imagine a bunch of bros just yelling in a room, trying to see whose idea wins out. I think that was like the idea or the misconception that I had going into product management. So I did wonder if I was really going to fit in and see how my career would pan out long term. And I remember this too, like partway through, I think I had just gotten promoted from APM to product manager, and my skip level manager pulled me in a room and essentially just asked me like, "Hey, do you think you're a people pleaser?" And I was like, I don't necessarily think so. And he was like, well, I think you've got about, this is verbatim the feedback he said. He was, I think you've got about 10% fuck you. And I think I need you to get to 30% at least. And in my mind, I was like, well, I don't necessarily know how that's going to help me. But I think in the moment, I was just like, well, I appreciate the feedback. So that got me thinking like, maybe, I could have walked away from that, maybe, pushing back a little bit, my people pleasing tendencies, or did I even have that? And I think that aligns with how I think a lot of us potentially have grown up as Filipinos, which is like not necessarily rocking the boat, being conscious of other people's feelings, more of that collectivist mindset. But as I've grown into my product management career, I think what I previously saw as a challenge in that conception, and it's helped me more that I am now being a lead PM and having more visibility to leadership and also having more of a direct influence in terms of how our junior talent is growing. Just trying to be mindful of that. I actually think what I thought was a challenge is now an asset. So no, I wouldn't say I'm people pleasing, but I do, and I have gotten this feedback a lot too, is a lot of people from different disciplines love working with me. And the reason why is because I make them feel heard. When I was early in my junior, or when I was a junior PM, what I tried to do a lot was compromise in terms of the roadmap. And that's where I think ultimately my skip level manager's feedback was coming from, was not having these features on the roadmap that might have given way a little bit to what design wanted versus what engineering wanted, and ultimately trying to build something for everyone or make everyone happy ultimately is a feature for no one. And we saw that in the business metrics. So now I'm much more comfortable saying no or going in a single direction with a feature on a roadmap. But I still, for all the stakeholders that I work with, I still either build that consensus or walk away from a discussion saying, hey, we disagreed, we're not going with your idea this time, here's why, but your input is still really appreciated, and we have more of these features coming up that I want to continue getting your input on. And that's how I've kind of reframed what I thought the feedback was, and also reframed like what I thought was a challenge into more of like, hey, like especially as a PM where I don't manage engineers, I don't manage designers, I technically can't tell them what to do, um, at least from that managerial relationship. But I rely heavily on my influence and my ability to build rapport and my ability to build trust. And that's where I think being a Filipino and how I grew up and having those experiences turned what I thought was a challenge to an asset.
Yeah, I really like that reframe, especially because, when you're walking down the street and you see a potentially Filipino person, you try to give them that like look. It's like, are you Filipino? So I think you could have that relationship building aspect with your colleagues, and that isn't a detriment to you. If it's someone that like, okay, John, I know that he's easy to work with and he can get the job done. I think that's only really a huge positive for us. I guess Ervin, how did John's sort of storytelling resonate with you?
I think pretty spot on to, I pretty identical to at least my experiences, right? We're taught to be quiet, not to question authority. I'm an introvert, and that even amplifies a lot of those Filipino values, right? And so it was a challenge, and I think it still is. It's hard to, it's not about getting rid of it, and I think it's reframing it and refocusing it to be an asset, kind of like what John was mentioning. And like things where it would have caught me in the past was not being assertive enough to make a path for myself that I wanted to, as opposed to just, in a sense, like letting people cut in line or whatever that may be. But the way that I've reframed it is looking at it as like be a good listener, be empathetic, try to really understand what the other person is saying. I'm an analytical person. I try to dig really deep to try to understand um, what the person is saying versus what the person is doing, and understand causation type of those things. And when I do speak, I try to communicate in the best method and language and timing with different stakeholders and in the best way possible for those audiences, right? Like I mentioned, I have a little bit of a technical background, so when I'm speaking with engineers, I can speak a little bit more closely to their language. So I'll synthesize the business problem into technical speak. If I'm working with execs, and they've got a certain affinity towards a certain area, I'll speak towards that direction. And that really goes around towards storytelling, as well as empathy, because like not all stories are going to really resonate with everybody.
Yeah, I think all of that makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience are sort of resonating with it. Um, how are those challenges? Are they still surfacing in your work now? I think it takes a lot of practice to overcome it, but what are ways that you're still trying to like overcome those things, even though you've done a lot of work to reframe? Are they showing up in different ways that you haven't experienced before? If you could talk a little bit about that, if at all.
I think they show up every day. John mentioned it, but it's around like not rocking the boat and being a good person that like, you bring happiness, or service folks, right? And when there's a feature request or there's an idea from sales or account managers and coming from all over the place, you want to make sure everybody's happy, but it's not necessary. That's not what success means in making everyone happy. There's specific goals, there's product goals, there's business goals that you have to sort of attend to, and being able to say no, or reframing a no to something different, like, hey, um, that's not the priority for this thing, or we can do that later. There's multiple ways to be able to connect with people asking you for your time or your resources, and then getting buy-in from them. It's almost like getting them to say no to the idea that they just came up with, is I don't know, the I think the absolute best situation, because it's not just you delivering that particular news, but it's all, but trying to overcome it is always asking myself, if I were the CEO, if I were the founder, if this is coming out of my wallet, what would my decision be?
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of it surfaces, especially more recently. I was embedded on a game team, so I know I mentioned I'm central and I still am, but I was embedded on a game team and I had to work with a lot of difficult designers who were very opinionated, and just being transparent, I still do get uncomfortable when sometimes, especially when there are emotions running high, when there are differences in opinion on which way a feature should go. But how I continue to build on that, or at least getting more comfortable or navigating that successfully into good product decisions and good the player user decisions, is now I actively invite um, challenges, or like healthy confrontation. So I'll say an opinion, and right after that, I'll just invite the attendees on the Zoom meeting, tell me why I'm wrong, and we can suss out a lot of that. I've also found that communicating and recommunicating and recommunicating and recommunicating strategy and vision, and really harping on the why, eventually gets alignment over the mid to long term. I also embody, or at least try to embody, give credit but take blame. So I know I don't need to have the brightest idea in the room. I just need to make the right decision. So when that right decision is not my idea, I'm always first to call that out. However, as a product manager, I'm still on the hook for business results. So even if it's not my feature idea, if the metrics aren't that great, I'll still take the blame for it. And that has helped me build trust, so that a lot of these conversations, especially when I'm new to a team that have started off sounding personal or really being emotional, have now turned into healthy debates that I actually look forward to with those team members. So that's kind of how I've navigated those, and they still pop up, but it's just the way that I go about building that trust. So those conversations are more productive as time goes on.
How do you both sort of hold yourself accountable for sort of like even reflecting on those challenges and how to improve for better? Like, does mentorship play a part in it? Do you have really good managers who are sort of coaching you through that? Because I'm just curious how you sort of skill build, because that's not something that you learn until you're on the job. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. For me, when I'm in situations that are taking a while to, or rather longer term projects, I do seek out a lot of feedback or perspective from mentors and managers. But also, I like to think of myself as fairly introspective, in terms of like after a meeting or after a call, just thinking back to, like, did that go well? If not, why? Would I have done it a little bit differently? So I kind of use a lot of my own personal interactions at work as sample size, in terms of, oh, that probably could have gone better, and here's how I do it differently. So if it comes up again, um, I think this is how I would do it differently. And I've kind of just formed my own feedback loop through that process. But yes, it's also been informed by managers and mentors.
I think besides that, um, it's highly unlikely the situations or the problems that I face are unique, that they've actually happened to someone before, probably very many times. And I go read, I go listen to podcasts, and I'm constantly absorbing, even though like I may not necessarily like, memorize everything that I've heard. Just exposure to those things helps. And then at some point, like, oh, I remember X, Y, and Z. I'm going through that now. And then seeing how those panned out. Sometimes they'll talk about how the mistakes that they've made and how to avoid it, or the things that did go well and how to replicate that. And yeah, so besides, but beyond what John had mentioned, it's looking at how others have done it as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's that meme where it's like there's no unique experience at all as humans. So someone's always there to sort of give you advice and input on that. Cool. I think we have some audience questions. So I'll sort of go back to the previous slide here and we can sort of address them because they were sort of like catch-all and they didn't really fit into any of these buckets. Folks in the audience, you're welcome to either use Menti or drop them in the chat. I think we have a question on there too. But I'll sort of start with what's on the slide here. What are some skills that you think every PM should have? Let's go first.
I can go.
Okay.
I think empathy, like real true empathy and communication skills, and those are like so hard to define. But if you recall what John mentioned earlier, we as PMs have no authority to tell engineers or marketing or designers what to do. Um, what we have to be able to do is tell a compelling story that motivates them to go do something, and then frame the problem in such a way that we all sort of come to the same or similar conclusion that, hey, this is the right solution and this is the right way to execute that. Um, I think I don't know. I don't know when the last time I shipped a feature or a product where it was like my idea. It was just a story I told, and then somebody thought of a really, really cool way to build it.
You stole mine. I was going to say storytelling. I think it's really an important skill, but I'll give like maybe the hard skill portion of that because I really like storytelling, and I think it also plays into being able to influence or at least find those win-win situations, which I think is also very soft skill. But one of the things that really helped me break into product management was my quantitative background and learning how to synthesize a lot of data that comes from multiple sources, not just read into or try to make sense of it, but also know what to prioritize. So oftentimes, like you'll get 70 or 80% of the full story from a data or quantitative perspective. That last 20% feasibly is not attainable, at least on any reasonable timeline. So like being able to know when you've gotten enough data from the quantitative side where that logarithmic curve starts to plateau, and then being able to lean on other sources of input and then translate that into the story you want to tell for the goals that you're on the hook for. So that's a good amount of experience that I got when I was in public accounting, where I got a lot of data and had to help partners make decisions. Being able to just take all of that and put it into executive summary and start that storytelling process. So yeah, I think that's a really important skill.
I guess sort of a follow-up question then is sort of this one that I'm hovering over in blue. I don't know if it's sharing, but we talked a lot about just these skill sets and how both of you sort of use those to transfer over into product management. But for folks who are looking to break into that now, what is some advice that you could give for them?
Yeah, I'm actually been in the process of interviewing for a PM role or a couple of PM roles at Zynga, where most of the candidates are not former PMs. They're looking to break into product management. So a couple things that I look for, and I think these were things that I tried to emphasize when I was breaking in. One is like, especially for the space that you're interested in, and this might be more applicable to gaming or maybe B2C, but just being really passionate about the product or the space that you're trying to break into. And I think that really puts you in the player mindset. I think as a gamer, being able to PM games is really cool, because sometimes I get to PM for myself a little selfishly, but really just seeing like um, what your uh, interest and your excitement and your passion is for that space. I think that helped me out, so I try to sense that out too. I'm also looking for folks that are critical and solution oriented. My line of questioning really quickly when I'm interviewing candidates for a PM role is like, give me an app or service you use every day. What do you like about it? If you were PM, what are the top 3 metrics you would be checking every day? And then what don't you like about it? And then design me a feature that you would improve, or design me a feature to address what you don't like about it. And I think what I'm really looking for, not necessarily the right answer. Oftentimes I'm getting products or services that I don't use every day, or some I haven't even heard of, but I'm looking for how the candidate is putting themselves, not only like putting themselves in the user's perspective, like what are the user goals as well as the business goals, how creative they are in their answers, how well they know the product, how structured they are in terms of going from um, starting with a potential problem, identifying the business or the opportunity cost, thinking about the segments of users, how applicable is it, thinking about how those users' goals tie back to the business goals. I know that's a lot, but essentially, what I'm looking for is like, can someone be critical about what's in the space or in the market? Are they passionate for it, and are they solution oriented as well?
Thank you. What about you, Ervin?
If you're coming out of school, check, for companies with APM programs, intern type stuff. If you're doing like a switching over, you've already started your career and wanting to get into products. See if you're already in a company that builds products. See if you can transfer there. That's the easiest one, I think. That's the easiest path, is because they already know you. It's a lot easier to take a risk with someone that they know as opposed to hiring someone externally. Then beyond that is, um, I'm not a fan of certifications, at least for product management. There's a lot of things out there that seem enticing to go spend money on and get that certification. Um, I don't, it does, I don't think it helps. What I would rather do, or rather see, is go spend a weekend, go build something over the weekend. I promise you can do this over the weekend with like a bunch of no code tools, and build a product yourself, because that process of building and then getting it to like your titos and your titas to go try it, if they can make it work, there's a lot of things you're going to learn from a UX perspective on onboarding stuff, and if it actually worked or not. And to John's point about like, hey, how are you measuring how well it's going, those kind of things that you can do.
So building your project and then storytelling on top of it, what were the challenges you faced and how you sort of overcame that, is a really good story to tell when you're interviewing for positions like that, just because it really ties back to those skills that both of you were talking or referring to earlier. So earlier in our discussion, we talked a little bit of just about working as Filipinx folks in tech, and there is a question here about any microaggressions, or again, sort of those like specific challenges. I don't know if either of you have like anecdotes that you might want to share, just to show, how our identities might have sort of impacted your work in a negative way, and how you overcame that. Tough one, I know.
I can't think of any.
That's good though, isn't it?
Yes.
Neither can I. Maybe it was that story about my skip level manager. In my mind, it could have been. He was white and also kind of a bro. So I definitely think there's ways you can phrase the feedback that he was looking to give, or the source of it, differently, where it wouldn't have felt as such. It
Yeah.
felt more geared towards Asian American population.
Fair enough. I guess that's another thing too. We're very generalized as people across different countries, so that makes sense. There's an interesting question here just about future proofing your role as a PM. So how do you sort of ensure that you're useful to a company, or what are some ways that you're sort of ensuring that like you won't get laid off? Are you using things like ChatGPT, keeping AI in mind? I guess how are both of you sort of trying to future proof yourselves?
I can go first. I don't know if you can really prevent yourself from getting laid off. There's a lot of really, really good people getting laid off, and to no fault of their own. Um, I've been lucky enough to be in a place where that hasn't affected me. Um, but I think in terms of keeping yourself um, valuable and growing is, yeah, I think you need to keep up with what's happening. Um, Economically and in technology, and how all of those things affect your specific industry, then your specific company, to understand, hey, is a layoff going to impact us? And then if it is, you can try to get ahead of it, right? Uh, and start looking for a new place or and whatnot. But also, as the economy is going to go up and down forever, right? And then so you continue to have to evolve into what is out there. There was at one point there was no Siri, there was no Alexa, and so this whole uh, voice user interface, as opposed to a graphical one, you had to evolve to, and then now you have like a lot more AI things, from generative AI to other things that you can use as a tool, to help you do more, to be able to do things faster, do things at scale. But yeah, I do use Chat GPT at work. Um, it helps me. Specifically, how I use it is, as an example, what did I do recently? Oh, I was dealing something with compliance, and I've never dealt with that particular thing before. And and I asked Chat GPT, I'm about to go do this. What are the questions I should ask to go figure out that I kind of uncover all the gaps? And then it rattled all of those things out. And then I talked to legal, I talked to security, I talked to a bunch of different people, and then reduced the number of gaps.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. One is I agree with Ervin. It is kind of hard to, if you're going to be laid off, I think you're going to be laid off. It's hard to predict or position yourself in a way that mitigates that. I have seen, at least in my just the limited years that I've been in product management, that folks that are, especially when the economy is tough, I think being more aligned with the core business versus something that might be a little bit more skunks works, um, kind of proves you a little bit, but it's not one to one all the time. For me, at least, the way that I think about it more is like how I can continue to stay relevant. And I'll look at every now and then, just introspectively, like how much value am I bringing to Zynga in my current role, and how much did I identify any opportunities to improve what status quo is too. I look at my value as not just maintaining, but also seeing, like, are we improving our efficiency? Are we cutting costs on PM hours? Because PMs are usually well compensated. So if we're spending more time thinking and less time operating, um, to that point, I do use Chat GPT. I've leveraged it in a lot of competitive analyses frameworks, where I'm asking Chat GPT, like, we have Zynga's working on, it's in soft launch, so it's public data, but there's a shooter game that we're launching. So when I was new to the project, I asked Chat GPT, like, for players that are playing Call of Duty Mobile and Apex Legends Mobile, give me the top 3 things that players really love and use player quotes. Give me the top 3 things that players are really hate and use player quotes. So getting a lot of those verbatims, offloading a lot of the heavy lifting and research, of course, verifying it myself to the extent that I can, but like just finding ways where I can be more efficient with my time and spend more time thinking and less time operating. That's kind of how I'm looking at both of these questions.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Efficiency and not completely overtaking the actual human element that is product management. Just sort of how that can complement your work. Okay. I think the session went really fast. We're sort of at time, but there was an interesting point from Robert in the chat about how we can connect after this. I have both Ervin and John's LinkedIn's on here. I think both of you are, welcome to connecting. And if you ever want to reach out to both of them, please use this as an opportunity to sort of capitalize on that network. For those folks who are in the audience too, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, drop your LinkedIn there, and we can sort of utilize our existing network here to sort of keep each other in the know in terms of what's going on, because this conversation could probably go on for hours. So thank you both again for your time. I don't know if either of you have any like closing statement or just like last minute note for our attendees.
Not really a statement, but if you're all comfortable, would love to see your faces if you want to get off of cams off just to say hi. No pressure otherwise, but yeah, that's the only
I'll stop
thing.
sharing.
Nice. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for attending.
Yeah, thanks for coming, y'all. Yeah, please reach out and connect, and we'll chat some more after this. Thanks for setting it up, Abby.